It's all interconnected. And one of the things that I tell people, especially since I work predominantly in the health and wellness community, is that people want to, focus hardcore on nutrition. That's great. Focus hardcore on exercise. That's great. Focus hardcore on whatever, metabolic health, on sleep. All of those are great. But if they still have this like unresolved psychological problems related to stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, it's not saying that all else is lost. Those are great things that they're doing, but oh my goodness, are they leaving something on the table?
Right. Welcome to Faust, everybody. Today, I'm joined by Dr. J.T. Wiles. Let me tell you about this OG and what he's been up to, okay? Dr. J is a clinical health psychologist who is board certified in biofeedback, HRV feedback, and Tai Chi for rehab. He has a passion for helping others reach their full potential from an integrative and holistic perspective, and has worked closely with everyone from elite athletes to executives on enhancing peak performance through training and regulating psychophysiology. He's also the chief scientific officer and influencer / owner of Thrive Wellness and Performance. And he's host of an incredible podcast that I highly recommend that I've been deep diving on, Hanu Health Podcast, Breathe Better, Stress Less. Did I mention that he's also co-host of the Q&A episodes of none other than Ben Greenfield's long-running, wildly popular podcast? Dr. J, thank you so much for beaming in, man. It's a long time coming.
Yeah, man. So glad that we're able to do this. The listeners they don't even realize kind of the effort it took. Almost 100%. Now I would say it is 100% on my part. It's like when it rains, it pours, man. So we made it happen. We are sitting in the room. The stars have aligned, and I'm glad to be here, dude.
Awesome, brother. Me too. I'm really excited about this. HRV it's coming to the forefront of so many different things. It just came up in a conversation I was having yesterday with I don't know how to describe him. He's not a martial arts practitioner, but he has taken aspects of this this Indonesian martial art breathing technique, and he runs a company called Vibravision, which I don't know if you've ever heard of, but
I haven't.
They're teaching blind people to see using chi. I mean, I'm summing it up in a sentence as best I can. It's intense, it's crazy, but the videos are unbelievable. It's like some daredevil shit. And he was talking about HRV and some of the training that they had to go to in order to learn this. And I was like, man, it's amazing the synchronicities that happen. But I know that you are the man to talk to when it comes to HRV. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot to unpack for sure. I mean, with it being so ubiquitous and a lot of people having at least some level of exposure, my biggest thing is trying to help people understand what it is and then just dispel like a lot of the myths around HRV. Like there's just so many myths. So excited to open those concepts up, man.
Yeah, man. And I know that there's, I've listened to a lot of, hours of you talking about it. And I know that the literature is already so abundant, and it's still, kind of early days understanding HRV and all its implications, and diagnostics and so forth. So I know that we're not going to make our listeners experts in the field. So, I would love for them to walk away from this conversation with a basic understanding of the importance of HRV and how they could utilize it in their life if they're so inclined, not only through some of the amazing products you guys have developed, but also, these days, the days of smart gadgets being everywhere, there's a lot of different ways for them to try to utilize HRV for an improved quality of life. And so let's start, at the beginning for them. What is HRV? How did it become, kind of starting to take a very prominent role in the way we understand health? And how did you become like the man to talk to about it?
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. I don't think it was necessarily by design. Things just kind of unfolded, which is amazing. But I didn't really draw this one up. So when I went to school to become a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, I was very interested in the intersection between mental health and physiological health. So predominantly, I was doing a lot of research, a lot of clinical work, and working with individuals who had comorbid ailments. And what we mean by that, or what I mean by that, is individuals who had physiological ailments. So maybe it was cardiovascular disease, chronic pain, diabetes, metabolic dysregulation, and then also had comorbid or also existing mental health related issues. It could be stress and anxiety, depression, trauma, and so forth. And I was really interested at the interplay between those two, because we know it's a really bi-directional street. What impacts our psycho. Well, I should say it's a two-way street in terms of what happens in our physiological processes significantly can impact psychologically, and then what happens to us psychologically can significantly impact us physiologically. So I was very fascinated with that. And it wasn't until I was a resident and I was working for the Department of Veteran Affairs. So working with the veteran population, which has its own challenges. It's a very unique population. So obviously veterans, prior military, a lot of trauma, a lot of
Mm.
exposure to things that people should have never been exposed to. And they've had to live through it and tell their tale and suffer some of the immense physiological and psychological problems. And I saw them predominantly in a multitude of array of clinics, but the one that was most fascinating for me was I did a pain rotation. And this wasn't this was unlike any other pain rotation I'd ever done. I'd done a few before working with individuals with chronic pain. This one was actually what they called, I should say, the Veterans Integrative Pain Center. So this was actually a clinic that was developed for individuals, veterans, who were looking to come off of opioid-based medications because maybe they've been on them for a long time.
Mm.
Maybe the effectiveness was wearing off, or maybe they didn't want to become overly addicted to those types of medication for managing pain. And they came to this clinic, which was looking to help titrate people off. They were non-prescribers in terms of clinic, and they integrated a lot of different mechanisms for pain management, things like acupuncture, yoga, tai chi, qigong. We
Nice.
utilized more like physical therapy, exercise, meditation, and nutrition, guided imagery. And that's all of them, except for, I think I named all of them, except for one that I haven't mentioned before, which I had not come across yet, but that was what I'm now an expert in, which is biofeedback. And I remember the first time I ever saw biofeedback. For me, I was somewhat skeptical. Like, I was always interested in integrative health strategies, and I was becoming board certified in Tai Chi. So you would think that I was more open-minded to the integrative mechanisms of and strategies. But this one was interesting to me because it just kind of looked like breath work. And that was a term that was not utilized back then. That's become obviously very popular now.
Hmm.
But for me, I'm like, this just kind of looks like breath work. We're pacing people's breathing. And that's about it. But there was a lot more power to it. So in one sense, I was kind of right. Like, it is a lot of breathwork practices. That's what biofeedback is. But the power that lies in biofeedback and HRV biofeedback is that we're able to look at objective data. We're able to take that data and quantify the effectiveness of the training for that individual. And so what is great about it is that I saw these veterans who had pain, who are also suffering with comorbid issues, trauma, anxiety, stress, and so forth, depression. And these individuals would report, yes, like, this makes me feel better. I feel less anxious. I feel like my subjective pain experience is going down. And we published some amazing studies about this. But this got to be married with objective data. We got to see these individuals' nervous systems change in real time. Their heart rates decreased, heart rate variability increased. We had sensors hooked up to the back of their shoulders and other areas of their body to look at muscular tension, and the level of contraction would go down. So all of these things were influencing their overall subjective experience, but also we saw objective data. And it was at that point I was hooked. I was like, this is like really cool, because I had some hard time as a psychologist, especially doing therapy. And then I was always like, I think this is working for the individual. They're telling me it's working.
Yeah.
And with the veteran population, there was some hard buy-ins, because these are people who are like, I'm skeptical of a lot of things. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I've done everything under the sun. But what this really helps to give is, again, that objective objective data. And so from then I just kind of spiraled into like wanting, and I think this is kind of how a lot of these stories start, right? It's like you witness it, you experience it, and then you're like, I got to learn more and more and more about this. So I just kind of dove into the library. I started getting board certifications in this area, just taking training after training after training, publishing and research, seeing clients and patients, and the rest is history. And then I saw kind of in the literature too, that we could not only apply the like HRV and biofeedback into the mental health space, but we can also apply it into the performance space. So whether it be sports performance, general health and wellness, and longevity. And so kind of for me, I just like using it for kind of all of these things. And I'm not saying it's, a panacea. It's kind of like this cure all. It's the thing that everybody, should be doing, but I kind of think that everybody should be doing.
But it is
It's
a
kind of why
thing that, yeah,
it is
absolutely.
a thing. Yeah. And so, and it caused me to now, for the last 12 months, I started a health tech company with two other guys. It's called Hanu Health, and we're building a consumer-based wearable and platform that is intended to monitor people's stress response at all throughout the day that they're wearing it, and then provide them with actionable insights based on their data and give them direction on what they can do, and utilizing different types of integrated therapies, whether it's mindfulness-based practices, non-sleep deep rest practices, or like yoga nidra type things, or biofeedback or breath work. So yeah, it all kind of came full circle. And I think you mentioned that I was the co-host of the Q&As with Ben Greenfield. And that's probably, to answer your question even more direct, like that's probably how I became known for most of this HRV world, is because Ben has a little bit of a platform.
Yeah,
So,
just a little one.
if I'm just a little one. So I've been able to go on there and speak ad nauseum about HRV, which has been fun. But yeah, man, it's been a great journey. And, I've learned a lot over the years, but in the last 12 months in building a company that's all about HRV monitoring and stress monitoring and mental health, I've probably learned more in the last 12 months than I have in the last 12 years, which is
Wow.
great. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I've been listening to you and Ben geek out in order to prepare for this podcast for a few weeks. And man, it's pretty amazing to hear you guys go back and forth and just the evolution of your own knowledge about HRV and how, as you've accumulated more data and understanding, you've changed your talking points and and then shared them as time went on. And, there's a lot of science that could benefit from that kind of malleability and openness to say, okay, this is what's happening now, as opposed to pretending as if there has been no change, which of course change is the only constant that we count on, I think, with everything.
Yeah. It's a funny point though, man, because the scientific community, while they tout themselves as being extremely open-minded, tend to live with a lot of rigidity, especially like if you were the principal investigator who found something and published on it and you have notoriety for it. Like, damn be it if somebody like tries to, bump heads with you. And so for me, it's been like, listen, like I am learning, and like life is a journey where I will constantly be learning. And if I rest on my laurels and think I have it together, somebody's going to bust my ass up, and I'm going to be like, well, I should have been a little bit more humble. I shouldn't have let the hubris get in my way. So, I will be the first to say, like, I guarantee some of the stuff that we're building into our platform and some of the ways maybe we're measuring or way we're conceptualizing data or providing data, I guarantee we'll find out that we're doing something wrong right now, even though we're working to do our best to stay as close to the science as we possibly can. The great thing about research is that it's ever evolving. And so I'll find out that something that I thought was right will be wrong later on. And I'll be so thankful that I found out that I'm wrong, because I don't want to continue to be wrong. I want to help people the best possible way I can, which is to acknowledge that, we just didn't know, like, because there's some areas of science that are still the wild, wild west. And you just don't know. Yeah, guns a-blazing.
Spoken like a true scientist, my friend. Respect level off the charts. Absolutely, dude. I mean, and it takes a certain amount of humility to be willing to do that and understand that the benefit of that for every party involved and for everyone who comes into the knowledge that you're presenting is above and beyond more important than any pride, or God, I wish politicians operated in that fashion. ironically enough, when I did a lot, when acting was really the sole part of my career journey, I was playing a lot of soldiers that had PTSD,
Mm,
um, and people recovering from traumatic brain injuries. And I don't know why I kept getting roles like that, typecast. I'm sure I
built
had
in.
my own little history going on. But I read these incredible stories about, many of these soldiers would come back, and oftentimes, sometimes they would get a therapy dog, and they would talk about their experience with that therapy dog, and being able to have something they kind of interrupts that state that they can find themselves in a loop, that terrible PTS, one of the worst PTSD symptoms of, that kind of paralyzed flashback trauma loop that some of the soldiers find themselves in, which keeps them kind of incapacitated. And the therapy dog was trained to kind of hone in on the heart rate and
Mm,
the breathing of this soldier, this vet. And whenever he would fall into that, the dog would come over and kind of nudge him out of it. And I was just thinking
mm,
about how profound, an application, even if it is on a smart device, how profound that could be, if it starts to act as, in a way that helps people manage their stress, especially some people who are, dealing with more traumatic issues. So it's just, I think the benefit of what you're doing, and the implications of what it can lead to are just enormous. So I just wanted to
yeah.
mention, like, take my hats off to you.
No, I appreciate it. The one thing that we are really trying to do and accomplish in our mission is to help people become more self-aware of how deleterious or negative the effects are of mental health related concerns, stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, and so forth. How deleterious it is to the mind and the body, obviously, and then also just train better mechanisms for self-regulation. If we can train people to become more aware, even if it's through the use of technology, and more able to regulate their nervous system, then we're going to have individuals who are going to be more resilient. Does that mean that they're never going to experience, symptoms related to stress, anxiety, depression, and trauma? Hell no. Like, of course, they're going to still experience it because that is a part of our human journey. Do I wish it wasn't a part? No, but I also see that sometimes the obstacle is the way, and then it's going to help us to grow and build. And it's painful sometimes, but it's going to be there. But if we can help people to better regulate it so that the severity of it, the detriment of it, the frequency, the duration of it, if those go down, well, then mission accomplished for Hanu Health. Like, that's really our intention.
Absolutely. And look, man, biofeedback is becoming more self-aware. Any way you want to cut the cookie, right? So
That's it.
people can say what they want about it, but if consciousness and awareness is your thing, then biofeedback, I mean, unless it's taken to kind of an obsessive extreme, it's not I don't see how it can be a bad thing, but anything taken to
Mhm.
too far is going to be a risk. But
Agreed.
anything that increases your level of self-awareness, that will help you understand whether the changes you are trying to make are working. So
Yeah.
I think it's all good. I
Yeah.
was fascinated reading about and listening to you talk about some of the relation that you found with the role of heart rate variability and gut health, because
Mhm.
again, gut health is another thing that is like, hello,
Mhm.
I'm over here, something that more and more, I think, of the most prominent literature and doctors need to start really kind of shouting out and recognizing, instead of pretending it's not the cornerstone that it is, regarding human health. And so it was so cool to start to learn a little bit about, and I would love for you to, and maybe it's too complicated, but maybe you can give people a little bit of an
Yeah.
idea how those two things begin to intersect.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, when I explain it the way I will, that it'll make it understandable why gut health is so interconnected with overall stress response. mental health and well-being, and overall longevity too. So when we think about our stress response, we should think about it in terms of nervous system taxation and basically heart rate variability, or HRV. It is our single greatest proxy that we have that's non-invasive, that gives us insight or allows us to observe shifts or changes in our autonomic nervous system. So another way of saying that is a proxy for looking at how taxed our nervous system is at any given moment from both internal or physiological stress or psychological stress. They are all interconnected, and we have to be the ones who are doing a little bit of the detective work, or we kind of have to act like an archaeologist and kind of do a little bit of self digging. I wish that Hanu, the device that I'm creating, would give you kind of that full level of insight, but we have to check in as well. It's a part of being human. We don't want to have everything handed to us. It just doesn't work that way. But when we think about, again, heart rate variability as being the single greatest non-invasive proxy for changes in the nervous system, when we think about stress and what stress actually is, it's taxation. It is when the nervous system is threatened. And anytime that we feel threatened as human beings, from an evolutionary perspective, we're going to act in a mechanism of self-preservation. It only makes sense. And if you don't act in a mechanism of self-preservation, well, then you're not going to continue to pass your genes down. so,
Right.
so we're only going to do that. So what do we do that? Well, we need warning signs. We need mechanisms to let us know that this is an opportunity for self-preservation. And that's what our autonomic nervous system is. Our autonomic nervous system is autonomic, which means it is automatic. It
Mhm.
happens involuntarily. This is through the control of cardiac muscles, through respiratory muscles, through different glands. You don't have to think about these things. Heart rate and heart is going to keep on pumping. Your lungs are going to continue to work as long as you're not, on your deathbed. You're going to keep on breathing. These are things that happen involuntary and automatically. The one thing that it was previously thought, though, is that this branch of our nervous system or division of our nervous system used to be thought that it was outside of our control. We really cannot manage that part of our nervous system because, again, it's involuntary, it's automatic.
Mhm.
Well, we found out that that's very incorrect. And what biofeedback is actually about is teaching you self regulation of your autonomic nervous system. It's helping you to be in the driver's seat to say, I am going to be able to press the gas pedal when I need to and pump the brakes when I need to, or modulate both of them whenever I need to at will. That these are not things that are just kind of sitting over there and I can't touch. Well, actually, I can. And I'll dig a little bit deeper into this, but I want to relate this to gut health. So, in the autonomic nervous system, many people might be familiar with two of the branches, but there's three. And I'll mention why I only mentioned two first, and then the third one. The first two are the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And the parasympathetic nervous system is traditionally thought of as our rest, digest, relaxation response. When we are activating our parasympathetic nervous system, what we are trying to do at that moment is recover, repair, and conserve energy. Whereas our sympathetic nervous system is all about mobilizing energy. How can I utilize energy right now? Because that might help me to flee the threat or fight the threat, hence why they call it the fight or flight response. But the sympathetic nervous system is really known as the predominant major source of energy mobilization and is considered our quote unquote stress response.
Mhm.
Now, these two work both complementary, so with one another, they work antagonistically, so against one another, and they have different functions and they can serve different functions. But for many individuals, it's not just necessarily that we're trying to turn one off and turn one on, but we might just need to be kind of effectively modulating them at will when we need them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the one thing that, or one branch of the autonomic nervous system that people forget about, or maybe don't learn about, is something called our enteric nervous system. And what is
Mm.
our enteric nervous system? That's our gut. So
The
our
gut.
gut is called our second brain for a reason. We produce a bulk majority of our neurotransmitters in our gut. And also it is one of the key drivers of communication pathways to our central nervous system, so our brain and spinal cord. So our gut sends a lot of information, what we refer to in the scientific community, afferently, so from the gut up to the brain, but also receives information from the brain down into the gut. most of its connections are going in an upward direction.
Hmm.
So let's say we are having problems with our, and this is another way to put it, and then I'll get into more of an explanation.
Okay.
So if our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system are responsible for our stress and relaxation response, and they are branches of our autonomic nervous system, so does that mean the enteric nervous system works in a similar fashion? And the answer to that is 100%. The enteric nervous system modulates and can affect change in our overall stress response. And that's because we know that there are significant connections with what is called our HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is activated or deactivated depending on context. And if we think about what is the most common context where we think about activation, stress, fight or flight response is on. But what happens? Well, there's actually some significant changes that happen with digestion. So when you are caught in the middle of a threat and your stress response is kicking into high gear, do you need your body to work on defecation and moving things through the body in order for you? No, not at all. Yeah,
absolutely
you
not.
absolutely do not. We don't want blood and oxygen shunted to that area. We need it in our brain, in our lungs, in our heart, in our the other types of periphery areas that we might need, maybe in our hands or in our feet. So we need it in different areas. The gut shuts down. Like it says, no need for digestion.
Yeah, that's why people tend to, they're like, oh man, I'm going to throw up. You know, I used to play baseball with this kid, and every time he was up to bat, he'd throw up.
Yeah,
And I'm like, don't worry, he's okay. He just kind of freaks out right before he goes up to bat. He throws up every time.
Yeah, indeed. And that happens if people have like a vasovagal response. And then also too, what we know is that if you're experiencing kind of these chronic stressors, maybe not so acute stressors, something happens and then you recover really quickly, but it's the repeated stress over and over and over again that we, especially domestically here in America, but it's worldwide, but in America, we are repeatedly like experiencing stress. Well, what happens? Well, you have a constant shutdown of the digestive tract, the enteric nervous system. And what does that allow for? Well, one of the biggest problems that we see is that stress, which downregulates digestion, causes massive amounts of fermentation of bad bacteria because everything is just sitting there. The process of digestion is not working efficiently. And so food and bacteria just sit there and allows for it to ferment and allows for it to grow. And then here's the nasty part about it. And it's kind of nasty because we're talking about, poop anyway. But then the nastier part about this is that it causes this crazy vicious cycle, because if you have a growth of bad bacteria and it is causing dysbiosis and it's eating out a lot of the good bacteria and kind of taking more precedent, then this actually is going to affect kind of the chain of other things like the creation of neurotransmitters that are responsible for happiness, pleasure, upregulation and downregulation of the nervous system. So you can see how that can cause significant like bidirectional problems. And so gut health is extremely important. So, but in both ways, and I tell people this every way, is that you can take all the probiotics in the world that you want, prebiotics, you can have really good gut health. But if your stress response is still turned on, good luck. That's some really expensive piss.
Everything, it becomes redundant really when, I've seen and talked to some of the people working with some of the most advanced technology available to the public. And they're performing kind of what medicine would call a miracle very often. And they say the one thing that it doesn't work with is if someone has high cortisol levels. If there's a lot of stress, it doesn't work. I'm like, damn, like that it truly is a killer.
It is. It's a vicious one, because and one of the things kind of coming back to heart rate variability is that we see this. So like when people if we know their baseline and they have a suppressed heart rate variability, which is indicative that they're experiencing taxation on the nervous system. So we know that if our heart rate variability drops, that could be because I'm sprinting. So I need my stress response to kick into high gear, or I'm sitting here and I just got a scathing email from my boss who's saying like, you royally screwed up, like, you better be cautious, you're gonna get fired, whatever it may be. My nervous system is kicking into high gear. It doesn't know the difference. And that's the interesting, like more primordial thing, is that it doesn't know the difference between, the mountain lion that jumps around at me or, whatever, Kathy, who's like screaming profanities, down, the few cubicles down or whatever. So it's an interesting thing. Now we know the difference, but our physiology responds very similarly. It may not respond to the level of severity or the duration or frequency frequency, but it responds very similarly. Like you mentioned, it's a secretion of cortisol, of other glucocorticoids, of
Mhm.
norepinephrine and epinephrine. And these things are great. They're really helpful. It is going to save you. If the mountain lion jumps around the corner
Right.
at
You're
you,
gonna be ready.
better hope. Yeah, you better hope you have all of that kicking into high gear. But if Kathy down the hallway keeps yelling at you for, screwing up your, daily reports, you're going to secrete the same damn thing.
Right.
But this is where it's going to be consistent and constant. And that's going to cause all of those deleterious longevity and health effects. And,
Mhm.
but again, they're both physiological and psychological. So a lot of this is understanding the interconnection. It's all interconnected. And one of the things that I tell people, especially since I work predominantly in the health and wellness community, is that people want to, focus hardcore on nutrition. That's great. Focus hardcore on exercise. That's
Mhm.
great. Focus hardcore on whatever, metabolic health, on sleep. All of those are great. But if they still have this like unresolved psychological problems related to stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, it's not saying that all else is lost. Those are great things that they're doing, but oh my goodness, are they leaving something on the table? Like
Putting the
it's
putting the cart before the
ridiculous.
horse. Yeah.
You got it,
Or the
man.
horse before
You
the
got it.
cart. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And that's, I always advocate, and I'm a big, advocate of meditation or Tai
Mhm.
Chi, whatever it is, you know what I mean? The first thing that you have to do is let the body know that it's safe. I mean, why does the body even store fat? Let's just start with simple, understanding of digestion. The body stores fat when it's in a state that it believes it's going to need to store fat to survive. So
Mhm.
if it like, I'll catch my son doing this, like he lets himself get so hungry, and then he gets into like this state, and we all know it. We have all experienced it, but he's just like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. You know what I mean? And I'm like, dude, take a deep breath. I'm like, when you go into this state, you're letting your body send signals that, you're starving, and maybe it feels that way,
Yes.
but you got to get control of your nervous system. Because then what happens is when you're eating, you're like, "Rah, rah, rah," and your body's like, oh, thank God, and it stores things as fat that it doesn't need to,
Yeah.
if you take your time
100%.
and you eat slow.
Yeah. Yep.
But we do all
100%.
these things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that. I mean, we even have, again, not to throw any too many shameless plugs in there for Hanu,
Yeah,
but
go for it.
we have pre and post meal breathwork practices that are built in, biofeedback practices,
Nice.
because we know that if you are eating under a state of stress and duress, which so many individuals are, it could be because I'm just already very psychologically stressed because of my day. Or like you mentioned, like I'm like, oh, I'm freaking hungry. Like
Yeah.
the body's revved up. Well, if we go ahead and enter into that state, well, we're starting off kind of with a really bad slate here, because we already know that the stress response is going to cause things to not digest well, to sit in the gut, and it's not a great place to be.
Mhm.
And I will, man, I throw my hand up. I will be the first to acknowledge that, like, it has been one of the biggest struggles for me. Growing
Mhm.
up, just kind of my family nature, and then just my nature in general has been like shove food in your face as fast as you can, like go, because like you got like
Yeah.
10 minutes and then you got to get on to the next thing. But I've really been, it's funny because both of my boys, I've watched them kind of show similar things to what you mentioned about your son. And I'm like, oh man, I can see I'm handing down the generation curse. Like they are experience it. And my wife is a lot better at it. Like she will slow down, she will enjoy her meal. Like, I'll be done with my full, 3 courses and she's 2
Like,
bites
where
in.
did
And
it
I'm like,
go? It's gone.
I don't know.
You
I'm
stole
like, I should be more like that. But like we throw things in like that because especially for individuals like me who eat under stress a lot and then also like just eat really quickly, I
Mhm.
need to prime the body that this is a time for digestion. This is a time for eating and relaxation.
Yes.
Like, enjoy the time right now with your family. You could leave life right now. So you should probably not worry about shoveling food in your body. You should worry about, oh man, let's have this conversation with this family in a nice, calm, good spirit instead of chaos, which ensues a lot and sometimes at the family dinner table.
It should be like a reminder on near every dining table in the country. I mean, it would do wonders for the state of health in our country, especially when we have such high obesity levels, and you
Yeah.
see those levels rising in children, which is just that is reflective of society and parents. That is not a reflection on
Yeah.
these kids. These kids are very much subject to the priorities of a society and a parental figures. So it's like, and I feel so bad for these kids who they continue to reflect how mixed up our priorities are as their,
Yeah.
guardians. So
And
it's
and
just
they
so
see
important.
us, and they see
Yeah.
us, or I won't say us because I'm not blaming you and I for this one, because at least I know I can't blame myself because I made this a rule. But like, and they see, people on their cell phones while they're
Oh
eating
yeah.
dinner, and everybody's just kind of like immersed in this world instead of like the real world that's right in front of them. And it's an interesting phenomenon that I'm seeing, and I've been seeing it now for a long time,
Yeah.
but it just like it's not getting better, and I'm hoping at some point that there is a level of transition and just a level of conscious, maybe global awareness of just the really bad impacts of just engaging in social activity that's not real compared to what's real, especially the things that are right in front of us. As a psychologist, there's nothing more I want to see than just like real relationships come back to the forefront. And I know it's
Mm,
not like that for everybody, but man, especially for the younger generation
man.
kids, like you just see such a disconnect there, and it's really sad, and it's causing immense like
And we're
overtaxation of the
just
nervous system.
starting to I mean, the younger they are, the earlier they're being exposed, and we're really, I think, just starting to see the repercussions of that coming to the fore, because a 16-year-old today is not what a 16-year-old was even 5 years ago. The level
Yeah,
of
yeah.
integration that they are kind of stuck with, and this thing that's glued to their hand, it is going to be different. I mean, it's it's scary. It's a little scary, and the
Oh,
fact that,
it absolutely is.
it's, you have, I mean, I was just reading how America and New Zealand are the only two countries on the planet who allow pharmaceutical companies to bombard their broadcast systems with
Yeah,
advertising money. And of
it's
course, it's
nuts,
two of
man.
the most highly medicated countries on the planet. Now, why isn't it legal to do that in the rest of the world? I wonder. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
but that's the problem with technology, is now they're coming into such power and influence with the amount of money they've made, that,
Yeah, yeah.
getting people to be aware of the dangers is going to be very tricky.
Right.
Unfortunately, we've seen that with some pharmaceuticals in the way that they, and certain religions, that you know things happen, and then it's just buried.
Yeah,
There is
yeah,
no means to get the word out, because they have
yeah.
too much power and influence. But it's awesome to hear you acknowledging it, even as you attempt to you're creating a device that, yes, falls into a tech gadget space, but at the same time
Yeah,
is about mindfulness. And
absolutely.
my soul brother, my partner, who actually started this whole channel with me, is knee deep in this space right now, and creating a lot of different things. He's going to love this podcast. But his name is Hunter Richards, and he's a very good dear friend of mine. But he's also working on technology that does a little bit of this, and you
Yeah.
guys are definitely going to have to talk one of these days,
Awesome. Yeah,
because
let's connect. Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome, man.
he's in Sweden right now, like, I don't know, probably hanging out with a bunch of billionaires and talking about
Oh,
what's next on their,
sauna and cold plunge, right? I think that's all they do in Sweden. Sauna, cold plunge.
yeah, and nitrous tanks, apparently, which
That's
sounds
right.
like fun.
No, it does.
Just wheel
Sounds
them
like
out
a
in
lot of
parties. I'm
fun.
like,
But
really?
no,
I'm coming over.
that's right. That's right.
It's
But
crazy.
I mean, it sounds like he's doing, utilizing technology or leveraging technology for good. Because the last
Oh
thing I
yeah,
want to do is demonize technology. If it weren't for technology, you and I wouldn't be doing this right now on a Zoom call, right? With all
right.
this beautiful equipment. But we do know that there's an overabundance of technology, and when we start replacing technology with reality, I think that's where it becomes problematic. We start to fully immerse ourselves, and it becomes the new alcohol, or it becomes
Yep,
the new drug,
that's
then
it.
that's where we have problems. But we can still leverage it for good. Like social media, I think there's way too much of an overabundance of it, but not every single aspect of social media is bad.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think there's just there's becoming a lot more bad than there is good about it. But I can't say like, oh man, every single aspect of this, I should demonize. There are good aspects about it,
Of
but we
course.
just have to exercise caution. I mean, with everything in life, right? You have to exercise caution, but tech can
Absolutely.
be a scary thing.
dude, social media is a very simple reflection of society. So you have people who use it in a completely innocent and positive way to stay in touch with family. You have people who it is as varied and nuanced as the individuals who use it, and that includes some
Yep.
of the companies that are using it to promote and sell. I mean, it's become a commercial space. Let's be realistic.
Sure.
Social media is also an extension of the corporations that operate in our country, and so now you have widely promoted and well sponsored interests attempting to
Mhm.
what is an ad? It's glorified propaganda is what it is, but the problem is it's so many people are so glued to it. you,
Right.
you see that it becomes a very interesting and dangerous situation, especially for young people. But
Yeah.
then you have people looking to take advantage of that. you know the thing I try to teach my kids is consciousness, and this is struggle. I've told people, I joke around it, but it's I say it in jest, but I'm sure you've begun to realize it as well. Being a parent these days, half of it is literally trying to mitigate bad habits that society is basically either giving you an option to abscond from society, or try to get your kids to be able to regulate themselves in this society that is just, everything is now and everything is technology. It's challenging.
Yep. It is challenging. I know. I've noticed it. My kids are young, 4 and 2, but even with 4 and 2, and even
Oh
kind of
yeah.
with what they see in ads and what they see and what is promoted as kids movies, like it's like I'm like, a part of me is like, they're probably not picking up on this because they're 4 and 2. But my 4-year-old, especially, like, he'll start telling me things and providing kind of his interpretation of things that he's been
Mhm.
getting from the information that he's been getting. And I'm like, oh man, like I can already start to see like this is unfolding in both good ways and then bad
Yeah.
ways, and it's probably my time to intercede in some manner. So yeah, scary stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. If to put it lightly, I think that just like everything else, the duality, the nature of humanity, you're going to have things that you're going to have people like you and like many people who I'm close with who are working to create counter programming, if you will, or a way to use the technology in a manner that is going to benefit humanity.
Mhm.
And then you'll have people who are more concerned about their bottom line and will continue to put out highly addictive algorithmic you know um, massive messes that are being consumed by
Yeah,
too many young people. But so the thing is, we'll continue to balance the scales. That's the most, as long as that's happening, we've got a chance, I think.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's a good point. Yeah, for sure.
But back to HRV. So if let's, like I have an Aura ring. Okay.
Mhm.
I try for I've only recently come into there you go, some understanding of the HRV aspect of my Aura ring, and how to monitor it over time. And then looking like when I moved here and seeing like my stress levels and, you know, days I exercise, trying to get a sense of it. And, and then learning everything that I have about HRV from you. I'm trying to, like, if I asked you, if people are trying to figure out what a good HRV is, how
Mhm.
can they, what's the answer to that question? I know it's
Yeah.
very individualized, but I know you can
Yeah.
speak to it much better than I can.
No, this is a perfect question that I always like to respond to on basically any podcast I do. And because what it speaks to is the myth, I think, that has been passed around. I don't think it's an intentional myth that's been passed around. I'll explain kind of my theory as to where it came from, but kind of this myth of there should be a level of comparison to other people. So if you think about different biometrics, right, we kind of have ranges that most people should fall under. So whether it's cholesterol ranges or blood glucose ranges, or that crazy thing called BMI, like we have all these different different ranges where people are supposed to kind of fit within. And so they think that heart rate variability, that must be the same thing. Like we all should be kind of like a certain range, or maybe there's a normative range where I can compare to people who are my same age, same gender, same, whatever other demographics you throw in there. And the short answer to that is that it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is because there are so many confounding variables to heart rate variability data, and mechanisms for comparing data, that we have to look only at the individual's response. So there's genetics, we know that height, we know that overall cardiorespiratory fitness, all of these things factor in. Being a male, actually, you have a higher HRV on average than women. There are all these variables that make it to where HRV is almost impossible to normatively compare. And again, to explain what I mean by that, compare to others. So it's really a self-comparison number. So one of the things, and the reason, my theory as to why kind of it's been passed down, that people are kind of like, I get emails all the time that's like, I have a really low HRV. Like I want to know how to raise my HRV.
Right.
And it's not that these are bad questions, but what that then says, so kind of for me, I have to conceptualize that as, oh, they believe they have a low HRV because maybe they saw, throw it out there, Ben Greenfield post on his Aura score, and his was at 120 milliseconds, and mine is at 30. Am I gonna die?
Yeah,
And like I can't tell you. Dude, I get questions like that all the time. Actually, because I've provided a little bit more of a context and explanation on other podcasts, and a lot of people have heard me there, I get less and less of those questions nowadays. But it's only reasonable, especially if you just got your Oura ring and you're like, oh my goodness, like my RMSSD HRV is 20, and I saw someone else on Instagram post 160. Like that's way off. And it's only human nature, right, to like compare and say, oh man, I must need to do something. What I tell people is that when we look at HRV biometrics, it doesn't matter if you're using Aura or Whoop or Garmin or Fitbit or even Hanu, is that you need to know your numbers. Is there such thing as a low HRV? Yes. What is it? What is low then? Low is relative to you. So let's say, for instance, your average is, and I'll use kind of easy numbers. If your average is 100 milliseconds and you see that is your HRV every night for Aura, and then one day you see that it's 75, and the next day you see it's 60, and the next day you see it's 50. What is that then telling us? Oh man, something is trending in a downward direction to demonstrate a low HRV for you that is indicative of your nervous system being taxed and it's not recovering well. Well, what is it? Well, maybe it's overtraining. You're doing way too much training because you got that marathon coming up and your body's not recovering. So your nervous system is like, I'm trying to catch up, but I can't. Maybe it's that you have a major presentation that you're giving that week on Friday, and the anticipation and the poor sleep and the worry and the anxiety is causing taxation.
Yeah.
So yes, you can have a low HRV. If you go from 100 to, let's say, one day you wake up. Here's an interesting one. When I got, let's see, that was back in 2021, January 2021. I got COVID, and for me, my HRV was like, I think it was around that time, was averaging anywhere from like 110 to 120. One morning I woke up and I was like in sweats and I felt awful. And I looked at my Oura ring score, and like my body temperature was up by like 3 or 4 degrees, and my HRV was like 16. So it's like normally like, 110, 120. It was at 16. My nervous system was wrecked. It was not the day for me to get going into the gym and try to, push up a personal record.
Go back to bed.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's basically what it was. Drink water, go to bed. That was about it. So what we need to do is we need to establish, well, where's our baseline? And, Aura does a good job at that. Like over the course of time, you can see like what's your average overnight baseline. And then when we start to see downward trends, well, what is that saying? It's saying that something in our internal or external environment is resulting in the nervous system being taxed. And the great thing though is, and what we do in Hanu is, we're looking at it at all times. HRV is being monitored 24/7 whenever you're wearing the device. And then we're watching kind of the ebbs and flows in and out of your baseline. When we find that our nervous system is being taxed, what I always say is that if we're not working or working out, then we should be repairing. And the way to
Mm,
repair, the way to help the nervous system is to train it through regulation. And the more and more we train regulation, the more and more it becomes habitual, it becomes conditioned, it becomes a part
mhm.
of who we are. And so that's why I find biofeedback to be so incredibly important. When we see significant dips in our HRV, when we see a downward trend of HRV because our nervous system is not recovering well, it's not repairing well, the best way to recover it is to send that message to it. We have the ability to do it at any given moment. And that's the beauty of this. Like, you don't need the biofeedback device to regulate your nervous system. Like, you can do some meditation, you can do some deep
Mhm.
breathing, like you can do some resonance breathing. The great thing about biofeedback, and this goes back to the start of our conversation, is that you are able to see the objective movement, the
Yes.
objective change. And that for me keeps me coming back for more, because I'm really good. I like doing breath work and going to a meditation class or doing yoga and saying, yeah, I think I feel better. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think I feel less stressed. And that's good. But when I see my data, and this is the scientist in me, if I see my data change, I'm like, uh-oh, can't argue with that. Like, look at
Right.
what my nervous system did. Look at how my heart rate dropped. Look at how my heart rate variability went up. Look at all these other biometric changes. It's like, yeah, Jay, you can't really lie to yourself. The same thing with stress. Well, human beings are really good at talking themselves out of us not being stressed. We have a hard time looking in the mirror sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I hear so many people who are like, yeah, no, I'm making it. I'm good. I'm not stressed. You throw a monitor on them and you're like, dude,
Dude, you're
like, you
fucking stressed.
like, exactly. I'm like, yeah. And a lot of times I'll just kind of like show them, like, I don't think you can argue with this. And they'll
Yeah.
see kind of these crazy dips in heart rate variability throughout the day.
Mm,
And they're like, whoa, I didn't realize it. It's kind of like, I put on glucose. Like, I've got a CGM on right now. I put on a CGM to monitor glucose throughout the day on people. And they're like, I don't have blood sugar swings. And they put it on there and like, oh my gosh, like, dude, looks like a freaking roller coaster. And yeah, and the same thing with heart rate variability and heart rate as well, is that, like, really stillness is key. I think,
mm,
managing our emotional response is key. Self-regulation is key. And it's such an overlooked marker of
my God.
longevity and practice for people. It's the one that I'm going to continue to preach until the day I die, unless I find out for some reason like regulating your emotions is a bad thing. Which means,
I don't
if
see
it
how it
is, then
can be, it's
I don't think so.
it
I'm willing to take a bet on that one.
I don't understand why it's not an ongoing class in every school across the country. I mean, think about what
Yeah.
the world would be if that was made a priority in quote education systems, instead of like, memorizing facts. And those things are fun too, but aren't we trying to create a better planet for everyone? So if we know that the most trouble we get into as a species comes from that moment when we have not taken a deep breath, we have not come into control of our emotions long enough to have empathy for what has happened, or at least try to
Right.
understand what has happened. We have gone
Right.
off, and we were hell bent on dropping the bomb.
Mm. Yep.
It just boggles my mind of why we still haven't found a way to prioritize these mental and emotional health aspects of
Right.
education into a system which, I don't know if you've noticed or not, is not working so well. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's a great point. Something that I've taken a lot of time to consider and think about, because it is extremely deleterious. It's extremely detrimental. The one thing that I always come back to is this idea that, like, if we're not teaching individuals, especially when they're young, teaching kids how to understand and recognize fruitless emotion. And I know that's a stoic term, but I love that term of recognizing when the emotion you're experiencing is not fruitful, or at least understanding that acting on that emotion will not be fruitful. Like, it is such a key component. And what I have found is that when I'm wearing my Hanu and I notice kind of these changes or shifts in my autonomic nervous system that are indicative that my stress response is on, if I don't do something about it, and I don't become more aware of the negative impact and self-regulate, then I am much more easily or much more likely to fly off the cuff, maybe say something that I'll regret, maybe throw out an emotion out there that's just fruitless, and it gets me into trouble. It impairs relationships. It impacts my work performance. It's distracting. And I've noticed in working with other people too, like working with a lot of patients over the years, a lot of clients over the years, is that when you can become more aware and alert to when your nervous system is sending you warning signs that what's going on right now is probably not going to end well, and then you self-regulate it. When you can do that, you're going to improve overall wellness and well-being. You're going to improve relationships, your work performance, your cognitive performance. These things all improve because you're not so easily ensnared and distracted by these emotions that while we need to recognize when we're upset, when we're frustrated, when we're anxious, when we're stressed, we need to recognize that, but then we need to figure out, what do I need to do either to harness it and use that stress for good? Because stress can be great. Like, stress inherently is good. It's a warning sign. It can help us produce, it can help us to perform. But when it starts to leak over that point of helping us and more being a detriment to us, well, that's when we have to condition a different response. And the best, most easily mechanism for doing that, and anybody could do it regardless of whether or not you're wearing any type of device that's tracking your biometrics, is just shifting your breathing, slowing it down, utilizing great mechanics of breathing. We know that we can almost instantaneously change our nervous system if we do that simple tip.
Yeah. I find myself saying this in every podcast. With every breath comes salvation. We used to say that. My God, this teacher I used to have, who was a vocal coach, she was an opera singer. She had a big Southern accent. And she'd be like, with every breath comes salvation. And she's right. She was just talking about singing, because of course people get so shit nervous when they're in front of people and they're like, I gotta sing. They stop breathing. So she's like,
Right.
breathe, honey, breathe. But it's so cool, because I think about my kids, and my God, I am contending with technology, but at the same time, I do catch them being like, taking breaths and coming, and every night my son and I, we before we go to bed, just to help him, he's a little more of, he holds on to things a little more and is more sensitive than his younger brother. And always has been. So we do, I think it's called box breathing, where we're inhaling for a count of 6, holding for a count of 6, and then the exhale's a little longer, and we just do it every night. And he's like, I sleep better when I do it. So I'm trying to, you try to teach them at least tools that will help them clear some of that, because I also know from reading studies that if they're on their little devices and they're playing their little games, and the circuitry going off in their brains, just like we just talked about, it's the same circuitry going off if they were playing freaking paintball, with an army of kids. Their minds are lit up the same way, and it's just as exciting for them. So it's like, okay, how do I contend with that and get them back into a place that is like, okay, that's all done with. You had your hour on your game. Give me that thing back, and let's get back into come back into a bit of a homeostasis, because it's a lot of dopamine, and it gets tricky to manage as a parent these days. But
no, it's interesting. They've done a lot of studies, especially kids who play more like first-person shooter games, and they've done things where they look at different biometrics, both EEG brainwaves, look at muscular tension, heart rate variability, other signs of changes in the nervous system, and they have found that, like, when these individuals are playing, especially if they're playing like in a community, so they're playing online with a bunch of different people, which adds another layer of a stressor for some people. The competitive nature of things is that these individuals, like, if you were to look at their body's response and not know what they were doing, it would look like that they were exercising, because all of these metrics look like they're out running. And you would think, oh, great, well, it's a mimetic for exercise. You just play games. No, that is not the case, because everything is happening without actual physical exertion. And so all of the secretion of all these hormones, everything else that's going on with the body being in that stress response, is happening happening, but we're mobilizing energy but we're not utilizing it. And that is the problem. If we don't utilize it, well, now it's just kind of sitting there. And that's when we have fat storage. That's when we have, an overabundance of things like dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. It can be pretty detrimental. So not to
putting the car in neutral and just stepping on the gas. Once you see what happens in an hour, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
eventually,
exactly,
you're going to have problems with that vehicle. I got a news flash for you, or
exactly.
I tell my brother all the time, he's starting to come into, greater health, and he's been doing yoga and he's been meditating, and at the same time, most days he's also, sneaking a cigarette here and there and smoking some marijuana, which is now widely available in a lot of places. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, dude, I'm so happy that you are coming into these new habits that are so healthy, bro. But you're also stepping on the gas and hitting the accelerator at the same time. And he's like, what the fuck do you mean? I'm like, you're still smoking, you know what I mean? You're still smoking. You're smoking marijuana, which is, a way for you to escape, sobriety. And the cigarettes are, they're also that, but they're also, counterproductive to your breathing and lung capacity and health, overall health. I mean, I don't have to go into the dangers of cigarettes for you, but people do everything at their own pace. So I'm happy for
Behavior
him.
change is freaking hard. And that's the one thing that I've noticed about being a psychologist is behavior change is really freaking hard.
So
We can have all the knowledge in the world, and that's great. The education component is great. It's good to know that these things are not great for you.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually implement, to put into action. And it's if you can solve the behavior change piece and create something that is a habit that is a part of your lifestyle, then you've succeeded. I mean, you've succeeded more than what most people do, because most people try things and don't actually stick with it.
We're going to get into your device in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you the story about, I have an 11-year-old. He just turned 11 in June. And during the pandemic, he developed this kind of head forward posture. I think in part because we were stuck in New York City, kind of locked in, and in part just the psychological ramifications of being in that kind of atmosphere, and then kind of taking it on the chin, which he does with a lot of things. He's very sensitive, and so I became aware. I was looking at him, I was like, dude, you know how you're sitting, right? And he was like, he had no awareness. He's a 10-year-old kid, really not, and I'm like, and I took a picture of him and I showed him. I was like, this is how you're supposed to be, and this is how you're sitting. And so we began this dance over a year ago now. Well, I think it'll be a year in October. Okay. And there hasn't been a day that has gone by where I have not been diligent in getting him to, I even took him to the chiropractor. The chiropractor says he's actually out of alignment from the way he's using himself. And I was like, yeah, I can, I can see it. I was like, it hurts my eyes, doc. I was like, I gotta fix this now while he's young and his bones are still soft. You know what I mean? Like this is it. And I have to teach him how he has to become so conscious of his behavior that he can make this adjustment to himself. And I was like, and it's been a Herculean task for both of us. And I am trying to do it without emotionally traumatizing him, the way that I was as a child, and for a lot of reasons, but encouraging him and getting him to be conscious of his body is such a task, in order to make a change that has become completely subconscious. So my God, man, it's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know in every cell in my body, but I keep telling him, like, dude, when we do this, and we are doing it, and he's doing it, he's much better than he was. I think we have about maybe we have a half an inch to go, but we've come a long way, and we're strengthening the body,
man.
Absolutely. And I was like, dude, you're taller than you've ever have been. I was like, and he literally is, of course, but I'm like, and he's just trying to get him to be more conscious of his body without becoming self-conscious in a way that is
Yeah,
unhealthy. It's a fine
sure.
line to walk.
It
And
truly is.
yeah, but it's so it's interesting you say what you say, because I'm like, man,
Yeah.
I feel that in my bones. But tell everybody about this incredible device you've created. I heard Ben refer to it as an Iron Man. What do they call it on
So
the
the
Iron Man?
Iron Man chest strap. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
um,
yeah. No, indeed. Yeah. So let me give kind of a little bit of background. And this is not for me, sounding like I'm trying to pitch to investors or anything, but I think that it's interesting to know why we created this.
yeah,
Like what was the mission behind it, and where did we see there being a gap in the wearable market? So the gap is that we saw that there were so many great wearables that had their own kind of niche and intention. So, when we think about health in terms of like four different pillars. And I think that it's a bit of a bastardization of health. It's a way oversimplification, but for the explanation purposes, we'll stick with four pillars. And they are nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress. So I think that those, and you can, think of other health components, spirituality, which I think fits, well into stress. It could fit into all components. Like there's other things, but those are kind of the general categories. And we thought about for exercise, oh man, there's a lot of great wearables. There's, Whoop, and there's Fitbit and Garmin and Apple Watch. There's a lot of great stuff in that space. We thought about sleep. We thought about, Aura. They're really great at that. There's other mechanisms of looking at sleep tracking, BioStrap, Whoop does it as well. We saw metabolic health. We're like, okay, so for a nutritional standpoint, like CGMs are all the rage right now, Levels Health, NutriSense, Signos, like there's all really cool companies. And then we thought about stress, and we thought about wearables for stress and managing and monitoring stress. And we're like, well, they kind of all have heart rate variability, but it's really just an overnight score, and it's one score, and it doesn't provide a lot of context, and a lot of people don't understand it. We're
right.
like, so nobody's really in stress right now. It's like, okay, there's an opening in the market. For me, like I wanted to scratch my own itch. For me, I've always wanted to have like this quote unquote perfect device that's really intended to kind of almost have like a biofeedback coach with you at all times. Like instead of having to go in and see someone like me and pay, whatever per pop or per hour for whatever 10, 12 plus weeks, what if we just had something that we could sell relatively inexpensively that did the same thing or almost something similar to that? Or maybe you did see a therapist, or maybe you did see a biofeedback specialist, and this could serve as a great adjunctive to that. So the times that you weren't in there, because if you're seeing a therapist or psychologist or counselor, whoever it may be, you see them maybe 1 hour out of your week,
Yeah,
and then you got the rest of the time. What are you doing?
yeah.
And so we're like, okay, this could serve and fill a really good gap. So for us, we're like, well, we want to capture really good data that is representative or gives us a high fidelity snapshot into somebody's stress response. And we started off, trying different devices that utilize what's called PPG technology. It's like the light sensing technology that you have in Aura and Whoop and Garmin, and so forth. And you can get really good data when you're very still. There's a reason why you only get HRV from Aura and from Whoop when you're really still or asleep. And that's because you start to move, and there's so much noise to signal ratio that like the data is uninterpretable. You can't use it. So for us, we utilize a consumer wearable that's called the Polar H10 chest strap. It is a wearable ECG. So it is getting the direct signal from the electrical output of your heart. And under almost every single condition, we're going to get pinpoint accuracy for heart rate and for heart rate variability, and then also be able to determine your respiration rate or how fast you're breathing.
Oh, awesome.
Our device is like if you had an Aura or a Whoop, and if the Aura or Whoop had a baby with Calm or Headspace, that's Hanu. So
Nice.
Hanu is like where great data and biometrics meet great therapeutics. And so for us, again, it's a continuous daytime monitor. We tell people you don't really need to sleep in it. It's a chest strap. People probably don't want to wear the chest strap at night, but it's
Yeah.
just a quick, easy on off. You can wear it for however long you want, clip it on, clip it off. Don't have to mess with electrodes or gels or anything. It's just a super simple, accurate ECG. And we're looking at a few things. We're looking at, number one, establishing your baseline. So where's your baseline heart rate? Your upper shelf, your lower ceiling. Where's your baseline heart rate variability? Your upper shelf, your lower ceiling. Where's your normal respiration rate? How fast do you normally breathe throughout the day? And then when we see changes, significant changes that would demonstrate, oh, there must be something that is taxing the nervous system, could either be through physical movement or, more particularly, what we're interested in is psychological stress. When HRV starts to dip, well, we alert you and we say, it looks like something's going on. Like, we determine that your nervous system is quite taxed. What's going on here? And this is where you have the opportunity, number one, to become more self-aware of the impact of stress on your body and on your mind, and you can log it. We call this a life event. And you can indicate under the life event, you can just click a button, a drop-down button, and tell us a little bit more and tell yourself a little bit more about what's going on. Maybe you were in the middle of a work meeting and it was highly stressful. Maybe you were in the middle of, an argument with your spouse or significant other. Maybe there was something else that was going on that was causing you dysfunction. A commute, that's another big one that we get. People driving their cars, their body gets into stress mode and they can't think and they get tunnel vision. So it allows you to log it. And then we also want to know your subjective experience, because in the end, we need to know how this is impacting you. And so there's a slider bar. You can slide it from anywhere from like, yeah, I'm extremely stressed, like almost like on the verge of a panic attack or having a panic attack, to all the way down to like, no, I'm like super relaxed, because the body can respond as if it were experiencing stress, but you might actually be quite excited or happy, because excitability, happiness, can actually be very much associated with a sense of joy and passion and relaxation, but it may look from a physiological perspective like you're being taxed and being stressed. So I think about, you're in a meeting, so you meet somebody for lunch who you haven't seen forever, and you're talking fast, you're using your hands, like you're really excited, heart rate's up. I mean, that's a sympathetic function, but it's not one that's going to be deleterious, because as soon as you leave and like you calm down from all the joy and excitement, your body's going to go into like immense relaxation mode. This is just kind of the thing that we see. But if it's these repeated exposures of, I keep using whatever, Kathy down the hall in her cubicle yelling at you, or your boss, poor Kathy, scream at you. Should have used Karen. I think isn't that the one that everybody talks about?
I guess so. Yeah.
Karen.
Kathy works.
Kathy. Yeah. I'm gonna throw Kathy under the bus today. But we need to know. And the great thing is that you can look back over time and say, okay, yesterday, the last week, the last month, what are those things that are really impacting me? And we chart it out. So it looks like you logged multiple events, negative events related to your commute. Like, man, 13 times out of 14 days, the commute really wrecked your nervous system. So now what do we do? Well, now it's an opportunity to self-regulate. Maybe during commutes, that's when I should be doing a good breathwork practice, or maybe I should be doing more of like a commuter's type meditation, or maybe yoga nidra, something that's a little bit, that allows you to continue to focus, hopefully, in your car, but it's great for helping to mitigate those negative effects. We utilize a lot of biofeedback, obviously, a lot of breathwork exercises, and we utilize one called resonance breathing. A lot of people are familiar with that term, but I'll explain it, because a lot of people are familiar with it because they heard it, but they don't know exactly what it means. So back around 20 years ago, there was a researcher and clinician named Dr. Paul Lehrer out of Rutgers University. He actually sits on our board of advisors, so we kind of have like the best insight now into creating these protocols. But he found that individuals, when they breathe around a rate of 6 breaths per minute, will cause what's called resonance in the body. And resonance just means that the cardiovascular system, or the autonomic nervous system, is resonating with your breathing. It's impacting significantly your breathing. We have a mechanism for actually determining people's exact resonance rate. So that's the rate of breathing that's going to most affect their nervous system. So it's going to significantly increase heart rate variability. And we included that in the app. We utilize that as one of our predominant strategies. Yeah. So people can go and take the assessment, find their perfect breathing pattern, or their ideal breathing pattern. I should say, I won't say perfect, ideal breathing pattern. And then they use that as kind of their pacing for breathing. So for mine, for instance, is 5 breaths per minute. So when I breathe at a resonant rate, I breathe at 5 breaths per minute, and my heart rate variability in the matter of 30 seconds will jump 20, 30 points. Like it's very significant very quickly. And I've done a lot of practice. Obviously I've done a lot of
Mhm.
training, but most people can expect that when they even just start off, even if they're stressed out of their mind, they're going to be able, when they change their breathing pattern and do resonance breathing, they're going to be able to change heart rate
Yeah.
variability at least somewhat. Like you're going to see it go up once you make changes in your nervous system. The only time that you may not see it is if you are someone who has a lot of perfectionistic tendencies and you're
Mm.
someone who's trying to compete against yourself. So therefore, when you're looking at the
I
data and
fucked
you
it up.
don't, right,
How do
exactly.
no, you
That's what
can't
it is.
plug.
And
My God.
that's what happens. Yeah, that's what happens. A lot of
Yeah.
people, they get really competitive with themselves and they're like, it's going down. So they try
Crazy.
harder and they
Yeah.
try harder and it goes down and down and down. Where I'm like, this is really about utilizing passive volition, just
Mhm.
allowing yourself to be and breathe and follow the pacer. And if you find that those numbers are screwing you up, turn the phone off and
Right.
just listen to the pacing, because
Yeah.
we can guide you through it with music. Yeah. So that's it. And, there's other things that we have included in the app, but again, we consider ourselves a full-time stress monitor and a
Nice.
full-time stress coach for you. So whenever you have it on, we're kind of like that person or that biofeedback clinician that's kind of with you, monitoring you and providing you with coaching and training wherever you go. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That sounds awesome. I'm going to be looking into one, because I love that, and I love I, I I'm constantly pushing myself and doing all
Yeah.
kinds of things that are athletic in nature, whether it's boxing or exercising in extreme ways. So I'm very interested in it. And
Yeah,
this has
man.
been an amazing
I'll just
tutorial.
send you one. Yeah. I'll
Dude,
get your address after this. I'll send you one.
that'd
Yeah.
be awesome, man. And
Yeah.
and I would definitely, I could definitely wear it and then actually return to everything that it's doing for me, either in
Yeah.
another podcast with you or in a solo
Love it.
vlog or in a podcast, because I create all kinds of
Love it, man.
content for my channel. So that'd be awesome, man.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. 100%. I'll get you one. Yeah. After this, just send me an email. I'll get my marketing director to send you one.
Oh, absolutely. I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Jay.
Yeah.
Hey, so let's go far out before I let you go back to all the wonderful work that you're doing.
I love it, man.
I gotta take you far out. So you don't have to strap in because, where we're going, we're not worried about G-force,
Let's
but
go.
so tell me, my friend, as someone who is, if you have participated in any kind of true breathing and meditation, then you know that there are some crazy, I mean, crazy is one word, but there's some profound effects on the body come
Mhm.
from these kind of exercises. Sometimes they come in the form of insights. Some people glimpse past lives. I mean, anybody who has participated in some fashion, usually has something to talk about that they're surprised by. So I know that, and I'm sure that you are not without a story for us. I'm wondering,
Sure, man.
if you've had, if you've ever come up against something in your practice or in a retreat that was completely mystical or inexplicable or supernatural.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I have one story that comes to mind, which is one of the most incredible experiences that I've ever had. Because I was extremely skeptical about it. And I think that's the best times, right? It's like when you're like, oh, I'm a skeptic, like prove it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I'm a believer. Like, here we go. I don't know if you or the listeners are familiar with a form of breathing called holotropic breathing, but holotropic breathing is a very intensive immersion into breathing practices that is a good mixture of very fast-paced cyclical hyperventilation, so a lot of fast-paced breathing paired with really long breath holds, paired with really long, like extended exhalation breathing. It's just a crazy mix.
Yeah.
The intention behind holotropic breathing is to stimulate the same pathways as DMT. And when you engage in it, a lot of people will, you normally do it like with nothing over your face. You kind of like put like in a dark room or you cover yourself with an eye mask. And then you do the practice with the intention of just kind of like opening the mind and the body to kind of experience kind of the opening of these DMT pathways. And I did this. I chose to do it for the first time. It was guided, but I chose to do it the first time in a sensory deprivation tank. And so, like, sensory deprivation tanks, like, if already have kind of their own experience by
Hmm.
themselves, but you add holotropic breathing on with a,
Dude,
it
was it
was
one with
bizarre.
water?
Yeah,
My
yeah, it was
God,
one with water.
man, you're
Yeah, it
lucky.
was. I know. It was
I
kind
would
of
have
nuts.
advised against it.
Yeah, and in retrospect, it was a bad idea,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
because if I would have just like gone out. So it's because you can get, I mean, and one of the things that happens is, with really fast paced cyclical hyperventilation, you can get really lightheaded. And
Yeah.
then you go from one fast paced breathing to a significant breath hold to a long paced, like extended exhalation type breathing pattern. And that can cause a lot of changes within your vagus nerve. And it can cause what's called a vasovagal response or syncope, which can make some people pass out. And luckily I did not do that. Or at least I don't think maybe I did. I don't know. But during this experience, being in this sensory deprivation tank, doing holotropic breathing, I had kind of this like, what's the best way to describe it? It was as if like I was on just almost like a full psychedelic journey
Hmm.
where I felt like what was being open to me was basically like, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it without like doing it a disservice. For me, it was this sense of calm and relief that was met both with feel. So it was a subjective experience and
Hmm.
feel, almost like someone was putting their hand on me in a way that was saying, like, you're good, you're okay, you're calm, you're in a good place. But then the visuals that I experienced
Mm.
were just they were these warm, just like colors and the
Mm.
feel of warmth, and I didn't see anything that was necessarily aberrant
Right.
or was it was more of just kind of like a general feel with like warmth. And so
Hmm.
for me, it was interesting because I was expecting myself just to kind of be in there and like do the breathing and be like, yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah.
just in a place where like I have no senses here. But then when a level of sensory awareness was opened up to me, it was just an extremely powerful thing. And
Wow.
I will have to admit, at the times that I've done holotropic breathing outside of a sensory deprivation tank, they haven't been as profound,
Mm.
as intense, maybe, but they've still been there and they've been really interesting. I do think that if you are like searching and you are looking for that experience, I think that, and a good tenet behind holotropic breathing is to have a guide, is to
Yeah.
have somebody there with you. um, and it's a really interesting one, and I think that it's an interesting stepping stone if people are maybe a little bit more hesitant to
Yeah.
try exogenous compounds and want
Right.
to try something more endogenously. I think it's a really interesting experience, but it was quite profound for me. Yeah.
No, that's an amazing story. And there's the breath work can be an avenue to so many different kinds of experiences. And I don't, I'm also hesitant to call them psychedelic, although they absolutely
Yeah,
feel psychedelic in nature.
I think so.
And I had a good dear friend of mine who has never done a psychedelic in his life, but has done meditation, has done some breathing work, and he saw a vlog I made about DMT, and he was like, "Hey man, next time you go, I'll go with you." And I was like, "Really?" He was like, "Yeah, man, I want to," and he brought his journal, and he, and we ended up just, good old fashioned vaping some DMT, but we do it very ceremonially. We use
Yeah,
blindfolds, and we do it
sure.
in a way that's very conscious. And
Yeah,
if he it was like coming home for him. He loved it, of course.
yeah,
Um, but it's just amazing to me how those two things cross over, and how, if you've ever, the first time I was exposed to that, I was DMT in, and then doing the breath work. It's like it's a familiar feeling, you know what I'm saying? It's more
yeah,
exotic when it's
yeah,
introduced, but at the same time, it's not like, there's something very familiar about the whole experience because of you've done the breathing already. So
sure.
it's
Yeah,
fascinating to me.
it really is.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
for sure.
Okay. So how many UFOs have you do you remember seeing in your life, or have you seen any, and have you been on any
Yeah.
ships?
Dude, I love it. I love it because you are taking me far out, which is fun. My wife has been fascinated with UFOs
Oh,
ever
nice.
since we met. Ever since we met, she just thinks it's awesome. She's a big time like sky watcher at night,
Oh,
especially
cool.
like when we're out at like the beach and you get like that horizon view and you can look out and it's clear. It's amazing. And so for me, it's really interesting because we've had a couple of experiences where well, we haven't necessarily been on the beach, but we've been together and like we'll just be kind of night watching and she's kind of just searching and looking. And we had this really profound one, because other ones I can almost like I've had it happen numerous times where
Mm-hmm.
I've it's been a UFO. I've not been able to identify. I don't know what it is,
Right.
but maybe I could explain it. Like, oh, maybe that's one of those, what do they call it, the Chinese lanterns or whatever that
Right.
float
Right.
up and go on, and maybe it's something like that. But one time, my wife and I were at my parents' house and we were out looking. It was here in South Carolina, looking into the sky together. And we just both happened to be looking out in the same direction. We're like, what is that thing? And it was shifting across. It was like, it's not a plane. It's shaped really odd, but it was kind of far out. So we couldn't see exactly
Mm-hmm.
what it was. But the thing that was weird about it is it was moving one direction and then almost immediately shot the other direction. And it
Wow.
was as if it wasn't like turn around and then go. It
Right.
was one direction, then boom, the other direction, and then out of sight. And I remember my wife and I'm going to have to remind her of this tonight during dinner. Remember that time? I talked about it today. We just looked at each other and we're like, what the hell was that?
Wow.
Like, that was intense. The one cool thing about it too is that was during the middle of the day. Like, it was not
Oh,
at
that's
nighttime. It
awesome.
was like a
Wow.
clear sky. So we had a pretty good visual of it. And so, yeah, so it was, so I've seen a lot of like what I would say are UFOs, but that
Mm-hmm.
is the most profound one where I was just like, okay, no, there's no way for me to explain it. And then when I've seen like, declassified like FBI files or
Like
CIA files,
unacknowledged,
whatever.
the
Yeah.
documentary. Yeah.
Right. When I've seen like things doing like that, I'm like, oh, well, that's it. Like, like, how can you explain this? So it's
Right.
fun. It's
Some
fun, man.
characteristics go across the board. I feel like your wife has a connection. I'm not even sure how conscious of it she is, but I feel like she's plugged into it because she has a connection to it.
I would probably imagine so. She loves it, man. Like
Yeah.
she finds
And
it to be.
dude, so the amazing thing is they have their own array of consciousness diagnostics that they have with humans on the planet.
Mhm.
And they often, and I think some of them have this responsibility in and of itself. It's to be taking the temperature, so to speak, of the planet and what's
Yeah.
happening with the anxiety levels. But it's no accident when you see them. It's never
Right.
a random occurrence, and they are
Yeah.
only seen when they want to be seen.
Yeah.
Which speaks to the level of comfort that they have
That's
with
right.
both you and your wife. So that's really a cool story. And
Yeah,
give your
man.
wife my best and tell her that we were talking about her on the podcast.
Oh, I will. I absolutely will. She might be a
Cool,
little bit
brother.
embarrassed. She's like a major introvert, so she
She'd be
might
like, "You
just
did
like put
what?"
her head down. But I'll be like, dude, we were talking about UFOs, and then she'll be excited. She's like, all right, let's talk about it.
No, tell her that there's no need for that to be embarrassed. This is
Right.
the podcast to talk about that stuff.
There we
But
go.
yeah, man. So the last question for you. You've seen and done a lot and observed even more, in the space of therapy and also technology, and seeing people come into a greater ease and expression of themselves, but through both those things. And in fact, you're creating a device that enables people to find more of that. And so, it's always a matter of kind of reprogramming the software, so to speak,
Mhm.
to gain more understanding. And I always think about how, as a parent, and I'm sure you're, right in the middle of this as well, and and will continue to be, the programming that goes in, right? If you could write a little bit of code for humanity, you know, um, in the form of a mantra or a sentence or two, what code would you write that would just allow, based on your observations, for a greater expression and ease for this human family that we have on the planet right now?
Yeah. Uh, it's an interesting one because my mind goes a lot of different places. And the one that I am constantly reminded of, and this comes a lot from Stoic philosophy, from Marcus Aurelius, my mantra that I live by. So I can't take credit for it because I don't think I'm writing the code, but I'll pass the code down generationally, if you will, is the concept of memento mori, which is remember that you're mortal, that you could you could leave life right now. And if you could leave life right now, which we know you can, let that determine what you do, what you say, and what you think. And for me, there's a practice that I've done for the last few months every single night. And it's going to sound extremely morbid. It's going to sound extremely maybe gross to some people, but I want to say it because it has changed a lot of what I do. And it is this notion, and this is again a Stoic notion of every single night when you go to put your kids down for bed, think of this as the last time. They're not going to make it through the night. They're going to die. They're going to die that night. How does that change what you're doing right now? Does it mean that you rush through your bedtime stories? Do you rush through your hugs? Sorry, it's like making me
Right.
emotional thinking about it because I think about it every night, man.
Yeah.
And for me, it's one of those things that it's caused me to slow the hell down and just say, like, we're all mortal. I could leave life right now. My kids, my wife, my family, my friends, my work. I could leave it life right now
Yeah.
and let that determine what I do, what I say, what I think, how I act, how I interact with people. So yeah, that's what I would write into the code of all humanity if I could.
Slow down and savor each moment,
Yeah,
because
100%.
no one knows how long they get.
Yeah,
It's beautiful, man. I appreciate it. And I understand what you're saying. It's basically carpe diem, but
yep,
stop and savor and be grateful.
yeah,
What could be more? That's why we're here. Why would you
yeah,
want to rush through those moments?
exactly.
In the end, those are the most golden moments. And so the
100%.
effect of your practice, I think, is the most important thing. It's what will help shape your children as they grow and the way that they remember their childhood. So, that's the most important thing. And like you said, when you get good at practicing something, then it starts to happen without thought. So
Yeah,
you just start to become grateful. And I think
sure.
that's like the most,
100%.
the there's nothing dangerous about that. And I think that that's the
Yeah,
best state for people to live in. So Dr.
yeah,
J, this has been awesome, man. You're so
yeah, man.
articulate and so easy to talk
I
to.
appreciate
And I knew that coming in because I had watched so much of you. I appreciate you lending me your time. I know how busy you are, and your knowledge about HRV and just the wisdom that you offer, man. It's been great.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me on. I've appreciated it and really enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate it, Dr. J. Well, I'll be in touch and keep you posted on when this is going to premiere and all that jazz. And you have a
Sounds
great
good,
day,
man.
my friend.
Yeah, you too, man. Hey,
Thanks,
let's
bro.
let me get you just send me an email with your address and we
Will
will
do.
jump that device in the mail. Should be get to you pretty quickly since you're like right around the corner in Georgia. So
Awesome, man.
that'll
I
be awesome.
appreciate that so much. Thanks, Dr. J.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely,
bro.
man. All right, take care, dude. We'll
Take
talk
care,
soon.
man. Have a great weekend.
You too, man. Bye.